The DJI Osmo Mobile 6 is now around 2 years old and is probably still the best-selling smartphone gimbal. But things are getting tighter for DJI, because today Insta360 released the Flow 2 Pro. The first Flow was already better than the Osmo Mobile 6 in many areas, but had a few drawbacks. Today I want to know 3 things. Is the Flow 2 Pro really the better smartphone gimbal than the OM6 in every respect? What has actually been improved compared to the first Flow? And what benefits do the new features of the Flow 2 Pro, such as Apple Dockkit, actually have? I can already anticipate one thing. Even in 2025, there is still at least one reason to choose the DJI OM6 over the Flow 2 Pro. But more on that later. To compare the two gimbals, there are 10 categories that make a good smartphone gimbal. And to make the whole thing a little more exciting, there is 1 point for the winner of each category. Let's see how many points the two gimbals can score. But before we even talk about points and categories, I would like to draw your attention to the design. And by that I mean the aesthetic design. In direct comparison to the Osmo Mobile 6, the Flow 2 Pro not only looks more modern and stylish, its design also appears simpler and tidier. Similar to the first Flow, the Flow 2 Pro has several design elements that look playful on the one hand, but also very cool on the other. The transparent surface of the gimbal arm and the new mirror on the gimbal head are particularly striking. We'll talk about its function later. It's interesting to note that the Flow 2 Pro has a completely new design compared to the first Flow. The handle is significantly longer than that of the Flow. The gimbal arm has a completely new design, and the controls have also been redesigned. Compared to the first Flow, they have been simplified once again. The Flow 2 Pro is also available in white as well as grey. Aesthetics is a question of taste, so no points for that. Perhaps the most important feature of the Flow 2 Pro compared to the OM6 is Apple Dockkit. Only the Flow 2 Pro supports Apple Dockkit. Dockkit is the iPhone tracking technology developed by Apple. This means that once connected via NFC, your iPhone automatically recognizes the gimbal and you can track subjects even when using the iPhone camera app. For example, yourself when vlogging. You don't have to use the Insta360 app for this. But why should this be particularly important and useful? Well, many iPhone users only use the iPhone's camera app and don't want to use another app just because of a new gimbal and the tracking function. But that's not all. There are some important features of the iPhone camera app that are not supported by either the DJI Memo app or the Insta360 app. For example, shooting in 4K at 120 frames per second with the new iPhone 16. The DJI Memo app also does not support shooting in ProRes and therefore not in lock. For these features, you still have to use the iPhone app, and then there is no tracking functionality when using the OM6. In my opinion, something else is even more important. Apple Dockkit is also supported by many third-party apps. Almost all important apps that use the iPhone camera. So Instagram, TikTok, or the most important video conferencing apps such as Teams, Zoom or Google Meet. In all these cases, you can now track yourself or others when using the camera and completely independently from the Insta360 app. Therefore, the Flow 2 Pro can also track you when you are in a Zoom meeting or recording a video with the Instagram app. This is cool and very useful. As soon as you have installed your iPhone and switch on the gimbal, the green ring light lights up, signaling that the gimbal is connected to your iPhone and tracking is active. You can now deactivate and reactivate tracking by simply pressing the trigger button. Dockkit is super useful, but also has a few limitations. Tracking isn't as responsive as when using the Insta360 app. It also lacks some of the app's advanced tracking features. And of course, it's a feature that is only interesting for iPhone users. Nevertheless, Dockkit is a very important feature that so far only the Flow 2 Pro and the first Flow Pro offer. So 1 point just for that, and I think it's justified. In contrast to Dockkit, almost all the other special features of the Flow 2 Pro also apply to Android users. If you shoot with a smartphone, portability is important. It's therefore important that the gimbal is as small as possible and can be stowed away easily, ideally in a jacket pocket or handbag. And this is another key difference between the two gimbals. The Osmo Mobile 6 has a separate tripod base. This must be screwed on for use and also unscrewed again if you want to stow the gimbal in a small bag or jacket pocket, for example. The same applies to the magnetic clamp. If you fold up the gimbal, you must first remove the magnetic clamp. This is not the case with the Flow 2 Pro. You can leave the clamp on the gimbal when folding it up. Of course, this has the advantage that you don't have to store the clamp separately or leave it on your smartphone all the time. This significantly reduces the likelihood of losing the clamp. The tripod is also integrated into the gimbal and does not need to be stored separately. You can simply pull the tripod feet out of the gimbal handle from below. This means you always have the tripod with you and don't have to think about whether you will need it or not. And you can also store the tripod and gimbal together more compactly. When comparing with the tripod mounted, the OM6 is 30 grams heavier, but what is much more important is that the Flow 2 Pro can be stowed away as a single piece. Therefore, in this category, 1 point in favor of the Flow 2 Pro. I don't always want to have a smartphone gimbal attached to my mobile phone. I want to carry it in my pocket and then be able to take it out and activate it as quickly as possible. Balancing should not be an additional difficulty. So which of these two gimbals is easier to set up and quicker to activate? As just mentioned with the Osmo Mobile 6, you have to store the clamp separately. So you have to attach the clamp to your smartphone and only then can you unfold the gimbal. You need two movements to unfold it. Now you can attach the smartphone to the gimbal and if you need it, you can also screw on the tripod. With the Flow 2 Pro, you need exactly two movements. You attach the smartphone to the clamp, which may already be on the gimbal, and turn the gimbal arm upwards. And that's it. And if I can recommend just one accessory for the Flow 2 Pro, then it's this magnetic phone mount. It's magnetically attached to the smartphone, can be left in place and replaces the magnetic clamp. It can even be used as a stand for your iPhone. With both gimbals, the smartphone does not have to be additionally balanced. The selfie stick is also just as easy to pull out. In practice, I think that the difference is rather small despite everything, because the OM6 can also be activated very quickly and easily. In my opinion, the main advantage of the Flow 2 Pro is that it can be stowed away as a whole, including the tripod and clamp, for which it has already been awarded a point. I therefore give both gimbals 1 point in this category. By the way, the Flow 2 Pro was provided to me by Insta360 for testing purposes, but this video does not include any additional paid sponsorship. So as always, I'm trying to remain as objective as possible and only award points based on facts today. Both gimbals come with the usual shooting modes. A follow mode where the tilt axis and pan axis move, a pan follow mode where only the pan axis moves, so the gimbal does not move up and down, but only sideways. And an FPV mode, which not only allows movements of the pan and tilt axis, but also the roll axis. You can therefore also perform lateral rotational movements. If you don't want to worry about the mode at all, you can also use the automatic mode on the Flow 2 Pro. Depending on the movement pattern, the gimbal then decides which movement it will follow and which it will not. The OM6 does not have an automatic mode. Nevertheless, this is a point in favor of both gimbals. Much more interesting than the modes, which basically hardly differ, is a comparison of the range of motion of the two gimbals. And here there are clear differences, and the Flow 2 Pro has two of its particular strengths in this context. While the range of motion is very similar with the tilt axis, as you can see here, there is a huge difference with the roll axis. If you turn the smartphone to the left, the OM6 stops at around 180 degrees, while the Flow 2 Pro allows more than a full rotation. But in my opinion, this is not a particular strength of the Flow 2 Pro, because whether the difference in the roll axis is relevant in practice also depends on which particularly creative shots you want to take. The difference in the pan axis, in other words the lateral movement, seems more important to me, as the OM6 has a very limited range of motion here and can only be rotated by around 90 degrees in both directions. With the Flow 2 Pro, on the other hand, there is unlimited lateral freedom of movement. It rotates around its own axis in both directions without any limits. But why would you need that? Especially if you are filming yourself, you can simply set up the gimbal in the center and then have it track you in any direction without having to constantly worrying about whether the gimbal can still track you or whether it has reached its limit. This can be extremely useful, especially for solo creators. But as I said, there are two special features that characterize the Flow 2 Pro when it comes to the range of motion. A common criticism of many smartphone gimbals is the limitations of the tilt axis. This is particularly important when you pull out the selfie stick and want to perform certain camera movements, for example a crane shot, which means a shot from bottom to top. In these cases, the limitations of the tilt axis are particularly noticeable, as the smartphone rotates together with the movement due to the limitation of the tilt axis, and a complete and correct crane shot becomes impossible. Insta360 has also come up with a solution for this. When the selfie stick is pulled out and the gimbal head is turned backwards, you can turn the head sideways and activate the so-called free tilt mode. Now the tilt axis can also rotate without limitation and you can perform gimbal movements that were previously not possible with any other smartphone gimbal. And not just perfect crane shots. Advanced filmmakers in particular, who attach great importance to camera movements, will be delighted with this feature. By the way, if you want to know which camera movements every smartphone gimbal user should master, take a look at my corresponding video. The point in this category goes to the Flow 2 Pro. Even though a gimbal today can do much more than just stabilize, that is of course still its main purpose. So I carried out a stress test with both gimbals. Here you can see shots taken with both gimbals in comparison. I use both gimbals with an iPhone, and it's really hard to notice a relevant difference here. Both gimbals stabilize the shots very well. Here I have made a direct comparison in lock mode, and the result is very similar. If you really only want to use the gimbal for stabilization, both work equally well. 1 point for both gimbals. While the performance of stabilization has been rather maxed out for some time now and is difficult to improve, the most important feature of a smartphone gimbal besides stabilization is tracking. And I set up both gimbals next to each other and tracked myself using the respective app to have a direct comparison. On the Flow 2 Pro, you can instantly recognize whether tracking is active by the green ring light. I have to give DJI credit for the fact that they have continually improved the tracking functionality of the OM6 with updates. Nevertheless, the OM6 cannot keep up in direct comparison. It's not only that it's limited by the range of motion as already seen, the Flow 2 Pro can follow the subject better with faster movements. I think it simply has the more powerful motors. In addition, thanks to the particularly powerful tracking mode Tracking Plus, the field of view is wider when using the Flow 2 Pro, as the image is cropped less with Tracking Plus. But that's not all. The Flow 2 Pro has 3 very special tracking features that make it stand out in this category. The first is active zoom tracking. At greater distances, so when using the telephoto lens, the Flow 2 Pro is able to track the subject much better. It does not lose the subject as quickly as the OM6. And even more interesting, the DJI Memo app only supports a maximum zoom factor of 8 in video mode, while the Flow 2 Pro supports a zoom factor of up to 15, which is the maximum zoom factor of the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max. Personally, this point is not so important to me as the image quality drops sharply from a zoom factor of 5. I find the next 2 tracking features much more interesting, because what bothers me about all devices that track subjects is that you can't determine the framing when recording. The subject is held in the center and that's it. But what if you want to follow the rule of thirds? So you want to place your subject to the side or keep your subject's head in the upper third. The Flow 2 Pro now has a solution for this. As soon as a subject has been captured, you can use the Reposition feature to define the position of the subject in the frame, so the head in the upper area or a person in the left third, and so on. This is a great feature that I will now always use and that I would like every tracking device to offer in this simplicity. I'm a solo creator and I usually only film myself alone, but often you may be traveling in pairs or in a group. And if the device then only tracks you, it can lead to the other people in the group being cut off. The Flow 2 Pro is now able to track groups or multi-person tracking, as Insta360 calls it. The group is tracked as a whole, no one is cut off, and you can also select a primary subject in case the group splits up. By the way, this is my daughter. She doesn't like being in front of the camera, but as I said, it's not just these 3 features. The general tracking performance is also better. This point also clearly goes to the Flow 2 Pro. That doesn't look good for DJI, but as announced, there is still a reason to opt for the Osmo Mobile 6. However, this is not about operation. Here too, the Flow 2 Pro was able to improve on the first Flow, mainly for one reason. The first Flow had a relatively short handle, which could be extended using the integrated tripod, but the handle was not as comfortable to hold as that of the OM6, something I also criticized about the first Flow. Fortunately, this has now changed. The handle of the Flow 2 Pro is now even slightly longer than that of the OM6 and at least as comfortable to hold. The general operation is very similar and the buttons have very similar functions. For example, pressing the trigger button twice centers the camera. On the Flow 2 Pro, the surface around the joystick has touch functionality and you can use it to change the shooting mode. Overall, I also like the control elements of the Flow 2 Pro better. The zoom wheel on the OM6 in particular is more of a weakness, as it's very easy to activate unintentionally. I would even recommend deactivating it. With the exception of the trigger button, all buttons on the Flow 2 Pro are centrally located. This is a very good solution. The only thing that could be criticized about the Flow 2 Pro is that the tripod feet are rather cumbersome to pull out, and the joystick on the OM6 is perhaps a little easier to operate. On the other hand, I clearly prefer the zoom wheel on the Flow 2 Pro. In addition, the green ring light on the Flow 2 Pro always lets you recognize immediately when tracking is active. Overall, however, both gimbals are very easy to operate, and anyone who has ever used a gimbal before will quickly find their way around both. So I give both gimbals 1 point. Partly because this category is also very subjective. Therefore, the next category seems much more important to me. What special and unique features differentiate the two gimbals? In other words, what other features that we haven't seen today are unique to the OM6 or the Flow 2 Pro? And here I'm having a hard time with the Osmo Mobile 6. Actually, I can't think of a single relevant feature that the Flow 2 Pro doesn't have. Both gimbals support HDR Dolby Vision, both can make a focus pull using the zoom wheel, both feature gesture control. And even the beauty filters of the OM6 can also be found on the Flow 2 Pro. Conversely, the Flow 2 Pro has at least 7 important features that the OM6 does not have, and that we have not yet seen today. Let's start right away with one of the most important features. Only the Insta360 app supports recording in ProRes, and therefore also in lock. An absolutely important feature, especially for advanced iPhone filmmakers. And the best thing is, this is also possible in 4K with my 128GB iPhone 16 Pro and without an external hard drive, which is not even possible with the iPhone camera app. Perhaps more importantly for most users, only the Flow 2 Pro can also be used as a power bank and can be used to charge your smartphone. You can even connect your smartphone while using the gimbal, so you can shoot and charge your smartphone at the same time. This can be extremely useful. The extreme range of motion of the Flow 2 Pro allows you to take a 360 panel photo, similar to a photo of a 360 camera. This photo can then be automatically animated. Of course, this is not possible with the OM6. And another extremely useful feature, especially for solo creators. You can use a second smartphone to control the Flow 2 Pro very easily and without the Insta360 app. This allows you to activate tracking from a distance, see a preview image, and always have the recording under control, even when using the usually much better rear camera of your smartphone. And there is another innovative and useful feature when using the back camera. The problem with using a smartphone for vlogging is that you want to see yourself when recording, if only to check the framing, and therefore usually have to use the much poorer front camera for vlogging. It happened to me several times during my iPhone tests that I cut off my head when I was testing the back camera. And there is now a really cool solution for this. There is a mirror on the gimbal head, and even if it seems strange, you can use it to assess quite well whether the framing is correct when using the rear camera. A very unusual feature, but it works. And there's another feature for solo creators, an integrated teleprompter. The Insta360 app now has a teleprompter feature that some creators will be very happy about. You can display the text while recording, even if you then have to use the front camera, of course. As you can see, the Flow 2 Pro is a fantastic tool, especially for creators, which is why it's important that it also has a long battery life. And with a runtime of 10 hours, it lasts significantly longer than the OM6, which only has an operating time of around 6.5 hours. However, I have to rely on the manufacturer's specifications here and have not carried out a full test for understandable reasons. There are also some other unique features, such as filters or slow motion tracking. Overall, this category also clearly goes to the Flow 2 Pro. A gimbal is useless if it does not support your smartphone in terms of size and weight. Both gimbals are compatible with most smartphones available today. The Flow 2 Pro with a maximum of 300 grams supports slightly more payload than the OM6 with 290 grams. Perhaps more importantly, the Flow 2 Pro also supports smaller smartphones weighing only 130 grams, while the OM6 only supports smartphones weighing at least 170 grams. The iPhone 12 mini here, for example, weighs only 135 grams and is therefore not officially supported by the OM6, even though the gimbal appears to work. However, this is a particularly small smartphone by today's standards. For such a device, you should probably go for the Flow 2 Pro. Nevertheless, these differences are not relevant for most users, hence 1 point for both gimbals. And so the Flow 2 Pro clearly wins this comparison by 10 to 5 points. Was I too subjective today? I don't think so, and I think everything has been well demonstrated. The Flow 2 Pro is simply the better gimbal in every respect. Yes, of course, it's not quite fair to compare a new gimbal with a 2-year-old device, but DJI just doesn't offer a better gimbal. even though they are still the market leader in this area. But there is still one argument in favor of the OM6, and that is the price. The Flow 2 Pro costs $160. The OM6 officially costs $20 less, but you can also find it for $130. You can find links to both gimbals in the video description. If you use the link for the Flow 2 Pro, you will also receive a magnetic phone mount as a free gift. So the really useful accessory that I showed you at the beginning. So which gimbal should you buy? Well, I think today the answer is relatively simple. Even though the OM6 is of course still a good gimbal, I think that especially for iPhone users, the extra charge for the Flow 2 Pro is definitely justified. But basically the same applies also to Android users. A detailed tutorial on the Flow 2 Pro will follow soon, in which I explain all the functions in detail. In the meantime, watch my video on the best gimbal moves if you're interested, and avoid browser extensions like Honey when using the links in the description. You might lose the affiliate gift. Don't forget to give me a like as feedback if you found this video interesting, and see you next time.